Reggy Cole, a 19-year-old, found himself in one of America's toughest prisons, where he had to confront the prison's ruler, known as El Diablo, or the Devil. Despite the brutal encounters Reggy had with Diablo, these confrontations surprisingly led to an unexpected joy. This is a tale filled with thrilling events and an unforeseen conclusion. Let's delve into Reggy's story together. Reggy was merely a child when his family relocated to Los Angeles in 1985, a city plagued by escalating crime rates and rampant gang violence. Reggy, the youngest of 2 boys and 2 girls, was only 10 years old when his elder brother, Kenny, aged 15, joined one of the area's violent gangs. Over time, Kenny found himself in serious trouble as his gang engaged in violent clashes with a rival gang. One day, the rival gang launched a surprise attack on Kenny's gang. They stormed into Kenny's territory, guns blazing, and shot at a group of them standing by the street. Kenny was among them and tragically lost his life. This incident left Reggy heartbroken, but he tried to concentrate on his studies to distract himself from his brother's death. His family tried to support him through this difficult time, but the influence of Reggy's environment was too strong. Being close to his late brother Kenny, Reggy inherited his friends and connections in this dangerous underworld. As the years passed, Reggy gradually drifted away from his studies until he finally decided to abandon school and immerse himself in the world of crime, following in his brother's footsteps. The situation worsened with the breakdown of their family and his parents' separation. Reggy's surviving older brother moved to another city for work. His 2 sisters got married and lived separately with their husbands, and his father, after separating from his mother, lived alone elsewhere. Only his mother remained at home with him. His mother, unable to control him, watched helplessly as he drifted further away from her each day. Reggy's brother-in-law offered him a job at his plumbing company, but Reggy declined, as he was already deeply involved in another world. Reggy began to cultivate and trade in marijuana. He didn't commit major crimes, but his involvement in drug trafficking was not surprising. Therefore, when he was arrested for the first time at the age of 16, no one was taken aback. The police spotted Reggy on the street and attempted to question him, but he refused to cooperate and tried to flee. He was soon arrested again, this time for possession of a weapon. Regrettably, Reggy was following in his brother's footsteps in this world, with most of his income coming from selling marijuana. Although Reggy was immersed in the gangster world, he had not yet been involved in any violent conflicts. However, in 1995, when Reggy was 19 years old, he was arrested for the murder of a man near a well-known bar in the area. Reggy was prosecuted, found guilty, and sentenced to life in prison. He was sent to Calipatria prison, one of the most dangerous and violent prisons in America. Dressed in orange, indicating his status as a new prisoner, Reggy, along with other prisoners, boarded a bus destined for the prison. The bus drove through the streets until it left the city and took a seemingly deserted road. Reggy looked out the bus window and saw nothing but desert. Soon he was able to see Calipatria prison in the distance. It was a large complex of several buildings, located in the middle of nowhere, akin to a graveyard for those rejected by society, where they could live out the rest of their lives in isolation. Reggy was nervous from the moment the bus left the court, and his anxiety increased as the bus neared the prison. As soon as they crossed the first prison gate, the first thing Reggy noticed was the smell of dung emanating from the prison's animal pen. Reggy lowered his head to his hands, which were tied to the chair, in an attempt to ignore the smell, but to no avail. The bus carrying Reggy and the other new prisoners crossed a massive electrified fence that surrounded the entire prison. Touching this fence would result in immediate death, a fact known to all the prisoners. Inside this electrified fence was another non-electrified fence. The purpose of these fences was to deter escape attempts and allow the guards to focus on the interior of the prison rather than the walls and perimeter. The ratio of guards to prisoners was 1:50, meaning that for every 50 prisoners, there was only 1 guard. Just 3 months before Reggy's arrival, there was a notorious incident where 5 prisoners had a violent altercation with the guards, resulting in 8 guards being stabbed with homemade knives. Although none of the guards died, the incident made headlines throughout California. Upon arrival at the main building of the prison, the bus carrying Reggy and the new prisoners was met by the gaze of the older prisoners in the outer yard. After the bus stopped, a guard began calling out the new prisoners one by one from a list. The prisoners were then taken to an inspection room where they were stripped naked to ensure they weren't hiding anything. They were then given prison uniforms and each was taken to his own cell. The cells in this prison were akin to graves, with 4 walls, a cement ceiling, no windows, and a door made of a metal plate with a small opening in the middle that could only be opened and closed from the outside. Each cell contained a bunk bed, a sink, and a toilet. Upon entering his cell, Reggy noticed a person sleeping on the lower bunk, his cellmate. Reggy avoided eye contact with him, not wanting to provoke him as he could be dangerous. Reggy was convinced that to survive in this place, he must avoid even talking with the other prisoners. He climbed up to his bunk using the ladder and laid on his back, staring at the ceiling. From his first week in prison, Reggy knew how dangerous this place was and that he must be cautious of everything and everyone. Reggy's first lesson came when a group of prisoners suddenly entered their cell. His cellmate tried to welcome them and be nice to them so they wouldn't hurt them, but these prisoners suddenly attacked him, beat him, and raped him. Reggy, who was on the upper bunk, tried to ignore the situation and pretended to be asleep so they wouldn't hurt him. This happened several times, with the prisoners breaking into their cell and doing the same thing to his cellmate, while Reggy tried to pretend to be asleep and ignore the situation. Reggy, while observing the happenings in the prison, realized that he needed to fight to survive. He noticed many prisoners had handmade knives, fashioned from ordinary objects. He decided to make his own weapon using the only tool he had, his toothbrush. By sharpening the tip of the brush against a stone, he turned it into a makeshift knife. Every day, the prisoners were allowed to go out to the prison's outer yard. Reggy noticed that most of the prisoners were part of gangs. He felt the need to join a gang for protection and support, but as a new prisoner, it was challenging to gain immediate acceptance. They had to prove themselves first. Reggy began looking for a gang that was similar to his original gang outside the prison. He tried to observe the situation from a distance without drawing attention to himself. One day, while walking in the prison yard, a group of prisoners suddenly cornered him. It was clear they were a gang, and their leader, a large man, approached him, grabbed his neck and pinned him against the fence. Reggy felt the eyes of all the prisoners on him. He remembered the torment his cellmate had suffered and realized that if he didn't react at that moment, he would suffer the same fate. Everyone would see him as an easy target, so he had to resist. With a sudden movement, Reggy pulled out his sharpened toothbrush and stabbed the big man in his waist. The stab wasn't intended to kill him, as that would lead to severe consequences from the guards and possibly even a death sentence. The goal of the stab was to intimidate and prove himself to everyone, a message that Reggy was not an easy target. After the stab, the gang dispersed, and the big man retreated to avoid a second attack. Reggy's resistance earned him a reputation among the prisoners as a dangerous person. After this incident, a gang called 49 welcomed Reggy, allowing him to join them. Finally, he had found what he sought, a gang that could provide protection and support, which was his only way to survive in this place. Despite the large number of gangs inside Calipatria prison, all of these gangs were subject to one man. Eddie Clark, a large man known as El Diablo, or the Devil in Spanish, was the most violent and powerful prisoner in the prison. For El Diablo, the prison was not just his home, but also his business. He managed all the smuggling operations of drugs and contraband that constantly took place inside the prison, establishing a small drug empire for himself. Everyone in the prison, including the guards, feared him and tried to avoid his wrath. The guards acknowledged his status and influence, granting him special privileges to maintain peace. Despite the seeming calm, the situation could have been much worse, as every prisoner was there due to a murder or a very violent case. The prison could turn into hell at any moment, and the guards were trying to preserve peace as much as they could. Their leniency with El Diablo and the distinctions they granted him were part of the necessary concessions. In this way, El Diablo took full control over the prison, and no one dared to confront or object to him, neither the prisoners nor the guards. As for Reggy, he was comfortable with his new situation with his gang. He not only felt safe, but also felt like a human being again. He could go out with his gang, play basketball, or sit in the yard and talk in complete safety. He had people around him that he trusted, people he felt had his back. Like all the prisoners, Reggy knew that he should always avoid El Diablo and should never attract his attention. Everyone knew the story of El Diablo, who, although he was only 34 years old, had spent 20 years of his life in prison. even when he was a teenager and entered the juvenile prison when he was 13 years old. He assaulted another teenager, beating him until he died. He was savage from a young age. After he turned 18 years old and got out of the juvenile prison, he returned to the world of gangs. It didn't take long until he was arrested again after he broke into an old woman's house, assaulted her, and killed her son who tried to defend her. From that day, he was in prison for a life sentence. This savage fully deserved his title. The problem was that El Diablo was moody and could even suddenly turn on his closest followers. No one was safe with him, and of course, since he was the king in this place, he always got what he wanted no matter what the situation was. Over the next 2 years, Reggy lived a relatively quiet life in this prison. He stayed away from El Diablo and did not get into any problems or make enemies for himself. 4 years passed and things were calm. During these 4 years, Reggy directed a lot of his effort and energy to exercise and strengthen his body and muscles. The emaciated teenager who entered this prison when he was 19 years old had become a 24-year-old young man with a strong muscular structure. Fortunately for him, he focused on building his muscles and body during these past years because he will need all of his strength for the upcoming events. Over time, El Diablo's situation has become worse. El Diablo's situation worsened as he became addicted to alcohol and was frequently drunk. When violence and drunkenness combined, it resulted in a volatile and dangerous mix. Even those closest to El Diablo feared him, knowing that a single wrong look could provoke him into violent action. His erratic behavior escalated daily. Despite Reggy's success in avoiding El Diablo for the past 4 years, fate led him into a direct confrontation with him in October of 2000. During a routine search in the prison yard, one of the guards found a handmade knife on the ground. The guards didn't know that the knife belonged to El Diablo's closest assistant and most trusted person. When the guard asked who owned the knife, none of the prisoners spoke up, knowing that El Diablo would protect his assistant and close friend. El Diablo, lying on the ground with the other prisoners, raised his head and began to look around among the prisoners, looking for someone to accuse. His eyes fell on Reggy, who was performing a painting task in the outer yard. Reggy felt the moment when El Diablo's gaze fell on him and knew that he was intending to harm him. El Diablo pointed at Reggy and told the guards that he was the owner of the knife. In the few seconds that followed, Reggy began to imagine the future and make calculations. If they added a weapon possession charge to his sentence, it wouldn't affect him because he was already sentenced to life. However, his status and reputation among the prisoners would be affected. If he submitted to the charge that El Diablo falsely imposed on him, everyone would see him as a weak person, an easy target. Reggy knew that just as he had stood up to the giant prisoner who tried to attack him in the first week, he must now stand up to Calipatria Prison's devil. When the guards asked Reggy about the knife, his answer was, "No, it's not mine." It was just a short sentence and a few words, but it would change his life forever. Now Reggy had officially become the declared enemy in front of everyone for El Diablo. Everyone was shocked after this sentence came out of Reggy's mouth, even the guards. Everyone was wondering how this man dared to confront El Diablo. Reggy did not face El Diablo after that, but he knew the situation. In the weeks following the incident, Reggy was constantly on high alert, expecting an attack from El Diablo or one of his assistants at any moment. Even at night, he couldn't sleep comfortably, fearing an attack. Whenever he was in the prison yard, he kept a close eye on El Diablo and his close assistants, trying to stay as far away from them as possible. A month later, in November 2000, Reggy noticed El Diablo approaching him in the prison yard. El Diablo wasn't trying to be stealthy, he walked straight towards Reggy. As El Diablo got closer, he grabbed Reggy's shoulder with his left hand and stabbed him in the waist with his right. It wasn't a fatal stab, but it was a painful message, indicating that Reggy's days in this prison were numbered. After stabbing Reggy, El Diablo threw the knife in the grass and walked away. Reggy pressed his hand against the stab wound to stem the bleeding. None of the other prisoners who saw what happened tried to help him. They all looked away as if they hadn't seen anything. Even the guards didn't intervene. When the bell rang to signal the end of the break, all the prisoners had to line up at the gate to be searched by the guards. This was a routine search conducted after every break to check for weapons or contraband. El Diablo was at the front of the line, and Reggy was a few prisoners behind him. Reggy was still pressing on his wound and trying to hide it from the guards, but the wound wasn't the only thing he was trying to hide. He was also hiding a knife that he had taken from the outer yard. As El Diablo was being searched by the guard, he turned around and looked at the prisoner standing behind him in line. He looked at Reggie with contempt and a sarcastic smile. Reggie knew he was in a dangerous situation, but he was prepared to face whatever came next. While the guard was still conducting the search, Reggie, clutching his wound, broke out of the line and swiftly ran towards El Diablo. He raised his hand, which was holding the knife, and stabbed El Diablo in the throat. Everyone froze, unable to believe what had just transpired before their eyes. El Diablo's eyes widened in shock, which quickly morphed into a look of pain as he retreated. He tried to stop the bleeding by clutching his neck, but he was suffocating and unable to breathe. In the few seconds that followed, El Diablo fell to the ground, writhing in pain. Before the guards could react, Reggie laid down on the ground, hands above his head in a clear sign of surrender, shouting, "I know what I did. I know what I did." He was trying to convince the guards that he wasn't a threat to others and that his only target was El Diablo. Reggie was immediately arrested by the guards and put in solitary confinement. The entire prison was on high alert that night. El Diablo's death could lead to a huge upheaval in the prison, so all prisoners were locked up in their cells and forbidden from leaving for any reason. Reggie now faced his second murder charge, which meant that if he was tried, there was a high probability that he would be executed. There was almost no chance for Reggie to avoid being convicted of this crime. Everyone saw what happened, and he admitted it. The only thing that could save him was to claim that he committed this crime in self-defense, which was relatively true. But even if he succeeded in convincing the judge that this was in self-defense, and even if he was able to avoid being sentenced to death, he would be sentenced to at least 10 years in solitary confinement. Reggie was very pessimistic, seeing a bleak future ahead. Even when they presented him with a list of state-appointed lawyers who could represent him for free in court, he didn't think much about it and chose a lawyer randomly from the list, thinking that in the end, the result would be the same. But his belief was very wrong. The random lawyer he chose, Christopher Blort, would do something he was not even dreaming of. This lawyer, Christopher, would discover something that would change everything. Everything had started when he began to delve into the files of the original case for which Reggie was imprisoned, the murder case that took place in 1994 in front of a brothel. The victim in this case was a 29-year-old man named Felipe Gonzalez. When two police officers arrived at the crime scene, they found the manager of that brothel, John Jones, and arrested him for questioning because brothels are illegal. John Jones became the main witness in the case, and according to his words, he saw everything that happened that night from the second floor of the brothel. The victim, Felipe Gonzalez, had approached a brothel but was told that the person he was looking for was not there. As he returned to his car, three armed teenagers, who appeared to be gang members, approached him. They demanded money, but Felipe, who did not speak English, did not understand them. Suddenly, the teenagers shot him dead and fled. John Jones, the manager of the brothel, claimed to have witnessed the incident. He noticed one of the teenagers limping as they ran away, suggesting he had been shot during the attack. Based on this description, the police officer in charge of the case began to look for suspects who matched this profile in the same area where the crime took place. One of these suspects was Reggie, a 19-year-old who was involved with a gang and sold weed. He also had a gunshot wound in his leg, which matched John's description of the limping teenager. Based on this, Reggie was accused of murder and sentenced to prison. However, as Reggie's lawyer delved into the case files, he found many things that could exonerate Reggie. It took him 3 years to prove that Reggie had nothing to do with this crime. The lawyer provided scientific evidence that Felipe Gonzalez was shot from a high place, suggesting that the shooter was not at street level, but in one of the neighboring houses, possibly even from the window of the brothel. Moreover, there were no fingerprints or DNA at the crime scene, all witnesses indicating that Reggie was the criminal. Even John Jones later retracted his testimony, stating that he told the police what they wanted to hear in exchange for allowing him to run the illegal brothel. The most significant piece of evidence that the lawyer discovered was that the gunshot wound on Reggie's leg, which had been a key factor in his accusation, was actually an old wound. This revelation further supported the claim that Reggie was innocent. Reggie was shot when he was 13 years old, 5 years before the crime he was accused of. The police knew it was an old wound, but the officer in charge of the case wanted to close it quickly. Despite Reggie's insistence on his innocence, he was convicted. While in prison, Reggy spent a lot of time in the library studying law books about false charges. He tried to avoid violence and problems, but they seemed to follow him. He was forced to defend himself and survive in an environment where he was accused of a crime he didn't commit. His lawyer worked on the case for 3 years. During this time, Reggy was in solitary confinement after killing El Diablo. The lawyer took the case to court again, and finally, the judge ruled that Reggy was innocent of the first crime he was accused of. As for the murder of El Diablo, they reduced the charges from first-degree murder to second-degree murder and sentenced Reggy to 10 years in solitary confinement. By the time the sentence was ruled, Reggy had already spent 8 years in solitary confinement, which were counted within the sentence. So, he had only 2 years left to be released. After completing the last 2 years of his sentence, Reggy was finally released from prison in 2009 after spending 16 years in prison, 10 of which were in solitary confinement. Despite the hard times he went through, he was happy with his freedom. After being released, Reggy entered a long judicial battle to regain his rights. Finally, in 2017, Los Angeles paid Reggy a compensation of $5.2 million. While these millions will not compensate him for what he went through while imprisoned, at least it will allow him to live a comfortable life for the rest of his life financially. That brings us to the end of our story. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Goodbye.